On a cold winter morning, Jake spotted a dog shivering in the icy lake. Despite his best efforts, the dog resisted leaving the water. Jake's concern grew as he waded in, hoping to save the animal. It wasn't until he saw the dog's leg that he realized the shocking truth. "No way," he muttered, eyes wide with disbelief. "Hold on there, buddy," Jake tried to reassure the dog. Its whole body was stiff and tense from the cold, and it had trouble breathing. Jake did his best to lift the dog out of the water, but every time he tried to do that, the dog began to whimper. It wasn't until Jake felt around underneath the surface that he truly realized what was going on. "Ah!" he yelled as he pulled his hand out of the water. He had touched something that was attached to the dog's leg, and now his whole hand hurt. He waved it around to ease the pain, even sticking it in the snow on the waterbank. When he looked at his hand again, it was completely red and started to swell. If Jake was in such pain from only touching whatever was attached to the dog's leg, imagine how much pain the dog was in. He had to do something, but what? The dog had to get out of the water quickly, or else it would freeze to death. Suddenly, he knew what to do. But why wasn't the dog getting out of the water? And what was attached to its leg? Jake pulled his hat from his head and put his hand inside to use it as a glove. Then he quickly reached underwater, grabbing whatever was attached to the dog's leg. He knew this would hurt the dog, but it was the only way. So with one swift movement, he yanked the thing from the dog's leg. The dog screamed it out, but from the adrenaline, it jumped straight out of the water and ran away. Suddenly, the creature that had been attached to the dog began moving around like crazy, splashing water in Jake's face and pulling him under. He wanted to let go, but it was as if it had suctioned itself onto Jake's hands. Luckily, Jake managed to pull his hands out of his hat, and he quickly got out of the water. His heart raced as he watched a big black shadow disappear into the depths of the lake. Soon after, his hat came floating up to the surface. He had no idea what he had just encountered, but he had no time to dwell. His hand was still hurting, and he had to find the dog. It was a good thing it had snowed earlier this morning, making the dog's tracks clear as day. He couldn't leave the dog behind after what it had been through, so Jake followed the dog's tracks into the bushes, where he found it licking its hind leg. It looked swollen and red, just like Jake's hand. The dog had barely any strength left, so it didn't resist when Jake picked it up and began walking it back to his car. He had to move fast, as a snowstorm was on its way and would hit the town in about 3 hours. Almost every store was already closed, so people would have enough time to head home. Luckily, Jake had snow chains around his wheels, so he had no trouble moving through town. He only hoped the veterinarian clinic was still open. Just as Jake pulled up to the veterinarian clinic, he saw the vet locking up the building. Jake jumped out of his car and ran to the vet with the dog in his arms. "Wait!" he yelled frantically. The vet jolted around, confusion edged on his face. "Oh my gosh! What happened to you guys?" he cried out as he saw Jake's soaked clothes. The vet opened up the clinic without a second thought, and Jake hurried inside. He placed the dog on one of the tables while the vet hurriedly searched for 2 heating blankets. Jake's lips were turning purple from the cold, and that dog wasn't looking so good either. "What happened?" the vet asked again. But just as Jake wanted to answer, he passed out. Jake awoke in a dimly lit room, feeling disoriented and weak. He struggled to focus his eyes, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The faint glow of medical equipment was the only source of light. It wasn't the cozy environment of the vet's clinic he had been in earlier. Confusion washed over him as he attempted to piece together how he ended up in this strange place. Several people in doctor's coats hovered around Jake, making him feel even more uneasy. These weren't the usual doctors he recognized from his small town. They moved efficiently, scribbling notes and adjusting machines, but the surroundings differed from any hospital Jake had ever seen. He found it odd how clinical and impersonal everything seemed. This was unlike any medical facility he had ever been to. Metal walls and advanced machines stood out in this strange environment, giving it a cold, sterile atmosphere. Jake's mind raced, questioning where he could possibly be. The room lacked the comforting personal touches of a community hospital. There were no cheerful posters or family photos. Instead, it resembled more of a high-tech laboratory. Jake's anxiety grew, not understanding what was happening around him. Gathering his strength, Jake managed to ask, "Where am I?" The doctors exchanged uncertain glances, clearly uncomfortable with his question. Instead of providing a clear answer, they mumbled vague reassurances. Frustrated, Jake's voice grew stronger. "I need to know." Despite his pleas, the doctors seemed unable or unwilling to give him the information he desperately sought. Their evasiveness only deepened his growing sense of dread. The doctors finally reassured him that he was safe and needed rest. "Just relax. You've been through a lot," one of them said, gently but firmly. Though their words were meant to comfort him, Jake couldn't shake off his uncertainty. Rest was the last thing on his mind. He had questions that demanded answers, and being tucked away in this mysterious room wasn't helping. Jake's thoughts quickly shifted to the dog. The last thing he remembered was carrying Buddy into the vet's clinic. Blinking away the haze, he asked, "How is the dog?" The room fell silent. The doctors exchanged looks before turning away. Their lack of response was troubling. Jake felt a rising urgency to know what had happened to his loyal companion amidst all this confusion. His question was met with an eerie silence as the doctors left the room one by one. Jake lay there, feeling even more bewildered and abandoned. Their silence was louder than any answer they could have given. What were they hiding from him? Thoughts of Buddy filled his mind, and he knew he couldn't just lie there waiting. The doctor's evasiveness was too suspicious. Determined to find answers, Jake decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't count on the doctors to tell him the truth. Slowly, he swung his legs over the side of the bed. The room spun around him, but he steadied himself, gritting through the discomfort. Whatever this place was, he had to find out what had happened to Buddy and himself. Jake slowly got out of bed, despite the pain in his hand and the weakness in his body. He clenched his teeth, trying to ignore the throbbing ache. His body protested, but his determination was stronger. He needed to know where Buddy was and what these doctors were hiding. Each step was agonizing, but he pressed on, motivated by his concern for his dog. Stealthily, Jake found his way to the door and peered out into the hallway. The corridor was equally dim, with only the hum of machines and occasional footsteps breaking the silence. He cautiously stepped out, making sure not to draw any attention. The hallways were a maze of metallic doors and advanced equipment, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was in some sort of secret facility. It was eerily quiet, and the cold metallic walls further heightened his unease. The hum of machinery buzzed faintly in the background, amplifying the unsettling atmosphere. Jake's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, and he shivered, rubbing his hands together. Every step he took echoed through the empty hallways, making him feel even more isolated. He had to keep moving if he wanted to find Buddy and unravel the mystery. Jake followed the corridor, trying to find any signs of Buddy or the dog. His eyes scanned every door and corner, searching for any clue that might point him in the right direction. Occasionally, he paused to listen for sounds, hoping to hear a bark or whimper. His heart pounded in his chest, the tension growing with each passing second. He couldn't afford to be careless. Time was of the essence. His thoughts raced as he slipped through various rooms filled with strange equipment and machines he couldn't identify. Each room seemed more bizarre than the last, with devices that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. Despite his confusion, Jake didn't stop searching. He rifled through drawers and cabinets, his frustration mounting. He couldn't let Buddy down. He had to keep pushing forward, no matter how unsettling the environment. Each step brought more questions and no answers. What was this place? Why were there so many strange machines? Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He thought about the dog, wondering if it was in danger. His mind flashed back to the vet's clinic, and he worried about how long it had been since he last saw Buddy. He had to find clues that would lead him to answers. Eventually, Jake found an empty office with a computer left on. Papers and folders were strewn about the desk as if someone had left in a hurry. He glanced at the illuminated screen, hoping it might hold the key to the questions swirling in his mind. Taking a deep breath, he approached the desk and sat down, bracing himself for what he might uncover. The bright screen was a beacon of hope in the dim room. Desperately, he searched through the files, hoping to find anything about the dog. He clicked through folders and documents, skimming for familiar words or names. His eyes darted across the screen, absorbing bits of information. However, nothing seemed to match up with what he was looking for. Frustration bubbled up as he continued his frantic search. There had to be something that would give him a clue about Buddy's whereabouts. Instead, he found documents detailing a secret project involving mutated animals. His stomach churned as he read through the reports, which described experiments and genetic modifications. The implications were horrifying, and his mind reeled from the information. He realized that the strange creature he encountered earlier could be one of these experiments. A sinking feeling grew in his chest. What had he stumbled into? Was Buddy somehow involved in this? His eyes widened at the realization that Buddy might have been part of these experiments. The thought was almost too terrible to consider, but the evidence was right in front of him. He couldn't believe it. His loyal companion could have been subjected to horrifying tests. Anger and fear mixed within him, fueling his determination. He slammed the desk in frustration, knowing he had to act quickly to rescue Buddy from this nightmarish scenario. Before he could delve deeper, Jake heard footsteps approaching and quickly hid behind a desk. His heart raced as the sound grew louder, each step echoing ominously. He held his breath, hoping whoever it was wouldn't notice him. The room fell silent, and just as he thought he might be safe, a shadow appeared at the door. Jake tensed, praying he wouldn't be discovered and that he could escape in time. The footsteps passed, and Jake took a deep breath, knowing he had to find a way out and rescue Buddy. The narrow escape had left him shaken, but more resolute than ever. He couldn't afford any more close calls. Carefully, he peeked out from his hiding spot, ensuring the coast was clear. With a renewed sense of urgency, Jake mapped out his next move. He had to find Buddy before it was too late. Jake carefully peeked out and made sure the coast was clear. His eyes darted left and right, scanning for any movement. Reassured that he was alone, he took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't relax just yet. Every second counted. The hallway, dimly lit and quiet, felt like the perfect setting for an escape. Jake tightened his grip on the door, ready to move out and continue his search for Buddy. Quietly, Jake made his way through the facility, looking for any exit or sign of Buddy. Every step felt heavy despite his best efforts to remain silent. Doors lined the hallway, each potentially hiding answers. His heart pounded as he checked room after room, finding nothing but more sterile equipment and empty spaces. The eerie silence of the facility made his task even more daunting. He couldn't help but feel the pressure mounting. He found a map of the facility pinned to a wall and quickly memorized the layout. The map showed various rooms and corridors, giving Jake a much-needed sense of direction. He traced his finger along the paths, pinpointing the containment rooms on the lower levels. Satisfied, he folded the map back and proceeded with a bit more confidence. This layout would be crucial in navigating through the labyrinthine corridors effectively. The containment rooms were on the lower levels, so he headed towards the nearest staircase. Each step down felt like a descent into the unknown. His footsteps echoed off the metallic walls, reminding him of the urgency of his mission. The air grew colder as he went deeper, and the dim lights made it hard to see. But Jake stayed focused, knowing that Buddy's life depended on his haste and determination. Along the way, he saw security patrolling, forcing him to stay in the shadows. Jake pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath as the guard passed by. The tension was palpable. He could hear the faint chatter of radios and the soft thud of boots on the floor. Timing was critical. He had to move in between the guards' patrols. Stealth was his best ally as he navigated the dark corners and narrow hallways. The coldness of the facility seemed to seep into his bones, but he pressed on. His breath was visible in the chilled air, and the numbing cold made each movement more challenging. Even though his body ached, his determination burned hotter than ever. Jake rubbed his hands together to keep warm, his mind solely focused on reaching the containment area. There was no turning back now. He had come too far to be deterred by the cold. Suddenly, he heard a faint whimper and his heart raced with hope. The sound was soft but unmistakable. "Buddy?" he whispered, barely audible. Jake couldn't be sure, but he had to find the source. He quickened his pace, his ears straining to catch the sound again. It was like a lifeline in the oppressive silence of the facility, guiding him toward what he hoped was Buddy. Every step propelled him closer to the containment rooms. He followed the sound, leading him closer to the containment rooms. Each whimper pushed him forward, drowning out his fatigue and pain. Jake's pace quickened as hope surged through him. He navigated through the winding hallways, the sound growing louder with each step. It was a guiding light in the darkness, pulling him ever nearer to his destination. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting closer to Buddy. As Jake reached the containment area, he found several cages, each containing different animals. His eyes scanned the room quickly. Monkeys, birds, and other creatures were confined in small, sterile cages. The sight was jarring, a stark reminder of the facility's sinister purpose. Jake called out softly, "Buddy!" One of the animals stirred, and an unmistakable bark answered his call. Relief and urgency mixed within him as he moved towards the sound. The sight was both heartbreaking and horrifying. Animals of all sizes, shapes, confined in tiny, sterile cages, their eyes full of fear and confusion. Jake's heart ached at the sight, but he couldn't let it distract him. Among the cages, he finally spotted Buddy, his loyal German shepherd. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Jake saw a glimmer of recognition in Buddy's tired eyes. He had to act quickly to rescue his friend. Jake quickly scanned the room, his eyes seeking out Buddy amidst the sea of cages and animals. There were all sorts of creatures, each one looking miserable and frightened. But he had to find Buddy, his loyal German shepherd. He knew time was running out, and he couldn't afford to waste another second. His heart pounded as his eyes darted from cage to cage, hoping to catch sight of his friend. In one of the cages, partially hidden by shadows, lay the German shepherd. Jake knew it was Buddy the moment he saw him. His heart twisted at the sight of his friend, lying there weakly. Jake moved closer, his ears straining to hear any sounds from Buddy. The room's cold, sterile air weighed heavily on him, intensifying his urgency. He needed to get Buddy out of here. "Buddy!" Jake whispered urgently as he tried to unlock the cage. His fingers fumbled with the lock, frustration building with every passing second. Buddy lifted his head slightly, giving a weak wag of his tail. "Hang on, boy. I'm getting you out," Jake muttered, his determination redoubling. The lock seemed complicated, and Jake knew he had to remain calm to figure it out. He couldn't let Buddy down. Buddy lifted his head weakly, recognizing Jake and trying to muster some strength. His eyes, though tired and dull, showed a flicker of hope. Jake felt a surge of urgency and love. "We're getting out of here, Buddy," he promised, his hands working faster to open the lock. But it wasn't easy. The lock was more complicated than he had anticipated. Time was ticking, and Jake felt the pressure mounting. But the lock was electronic, and he needed to find a way to disable it. Jake cursed under his breath. Of course, it wouldn't be simple. He looked around, trying to spot anything that could help. The cages seemed to be connected to a central system. He had to find a way to access it. His eyes landed on a control panel nearby, and he hurried over, hoping to figure it out quickly. Jake hurried to the control panel nearby, hoping he could figure out how to open the cages without alerting security. His fingers flew over the buttons and switches, his mind racing to make sense of the controls. Every second felt like an eternity. He had to trust his instincts and stay focused. The lives of all those animals, especially Buddy, depended on him figuring out how to disable those locks. The control panel was complex, but Jake's determination fueled his focus. He took a deep breath, zoning in on the task at hand. Each button and switch seemed to hold crucial importance. He recalled bits of information from various tech manuals he had read over the years. Slowly, the layout of the panel started to make sense. Jake's fingers moved with purpose as he worked to unlock the cages without triggering an alarm. After a few tense moments, he managed to unlock the cages. The electronic locks clicked open one by one. Jake felt a wave of relief. He swiftly moved back to Buddy's cage. "Come on, boy, you're free now," he said, opening the door. Buddy staggered out, wobbling on his swollen leg. Jake knelt to help him, his fear for Buddy's life momentarily easing. They needed to get out before someone noticed. Buddy staggered out, his leg still swollen, and Jake carefully picked him up. The dog's weight felt heavier, likely due to his weakened state. Jake winced, but managed to lift him, cradling Buddy close to his chest. "We have to move fast, Buddy," he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one had seen them yet. The facility seemed quiet, but Jake knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. They had to move fast. The snowstorm was already causing disruptions in the facility. The lights flickered and a cold draft seeped through the hallways. Jake could hear the distant howl of the wind outside. With Buddy in his arms, he couldn't afford any mistakes. "Hang in there, Buddy. We're almost out," Jake assured, already plotting their escape route. Every second counted as they made their way toward freedom. Jake retraced his steps, avoiding patrols and making his way towards a possible escape route. He moved cautiously, ensuring each step was silent on the cold metallic floor of the facility. Buddy followed close behind, his weak legs struggling but determined. Jake's mind raced, mapping out their path. He knew they had to reach the ventilation system quickly, or they would be caught. They crawled through the tight, cold tunnels, with Buddy's occasional whimper urging Jake to move faster. The metal surface chilled their bones, making every movement more agonizing. Jake pushed forward, his hands and knees aching against the rough surface. Each sound seemed amplified in the confined space. He kept talking to Buddy, encouraging him, even though words felt inadequate in their dire situation. Finally, they saw a faint light signaling an exit. Jake's heart leapt with hope as the glow grew brighter with each crawl. He pushed through the discomfort, urging Buddy to keep moving. The cold air of the tunnel was a stark reminder of the storm outside, but the sight of light filled Jake with renewed determination to reach the end. Freedom was within reach. Emerging from the ventilation system, Jake and Buddy found themselves outside in the blizzard. The icy wind hit them like a wall, instantly numbing their exposed skin. Jake held Buddy close to shield him from the worst of the storm. Snow whipped around them, blurring their vision, but the sense of finally being out of the facility gave them a brief moment of respite. The cold wind was brutal, but freedom was in sight. Jake squinted through the blinding flurries of snow, determined to press on. He knew staying out here for too long could be just as dangerous as the facility. Buddy shivered against him, and Jake tightened his hold. "We're almost there, Buddy," he said through chattering teeth, trudging through the deepening snow with all the strength he could muster. Jake wrapped Buddy in his coat as they trudged through the snow. Each step was a struggle against the biting wind. The coat provided a bit of warmth for Buddy, who leaned against Jake, tired but trusting. They moved slowly but steadily, driven by the need to escape. Their breath fogged in front of them, the stark reality of the storm making every move critical. The town seemed far and the storm was worsening, but giving up was not an option. Every gust of wind felt like a personal attack, but Jake pushed forward, his eyes constantly scanning for any signs of help or shelter. Buddy's weight was a comfort and a burden, reminding Jake that he wasn't doing this alone. They had come too far to turn back now. They moved with determination, driven by the need to survive and expose the truth. Each step toward the town was a battle against the relentless blizzard. Jake's thoughts drifted to the documents he had seen, the horrifying experiments that Buddy might have endured. He clenched his jaw, fueling his resolve. Survival wasn't just about them. It was about bringing those responsible to justice. Jake noticed headlights approaching and waved desperately. The lights grew brighter, cutting through the snow-filled darkness. He hoped whoever was driving would stop and help them. Jake shouted for help, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. He and Buddy were nearly out of strength. The sight of the approaching vehicle fueled a last burst of hope, pushing Jake to wave more vigorously. A truck stopped, and the driver, an older man, helped them into the warmth of the vehicle. The man's concerned questions were met with Jake's exhausted gratitude. He carefully laid Buddy on the seat, relief washing over him as the truck's heater kicked in. "Thank you," Jake said between breaths. The driver nodded, understanding the urgency. They sped off towards the town, leaving the storm behind. Once safe inside the truck, Jake told the driver to head to the town's only open vet clinic. The urgency in Jake's voice left no room for questions. The driver nodded and focused on the road ahead. Time was of the essence, and with every passing second, Jake's concern for Buddy grew. Snow continued to fall heavily, but the truck's sturdy build kept them moving steadily through the storm. He needed to get Buddy some help and call for authorities. Jake's phone was nearly dead, but he used the remaining battery to ring the local sheriff. "Sheriff, I have an emergency. We found something disturbing." Jake's voice trembled. After explaining briefly, he could only hope the sheriff took his call seriously. He hung up, sighing deeply. Ensuring Buddy's safety was his immediate concern, but the authorities needed to know as well. At the clinic, the vet and some locals helped warm Buddy up. They worked quickly, wrapping him in heating blankets and using warm towels. Buddy's shivering gradually subsided, and the once lifeless look in his eyes began to fade. Jake watched intently, feeling a glimmer of hope. The vet assured him that Buddy was in good hands. The entire town's compassion and quick action seemed to shine through during this critical moment. Jake shared his experience with the vet, but the primary focus was on the German Shepherd. The vet listened while continuing to monitor Buddy. "That creature in the lake, it was like nothing I've ever seen," Jake vowed. His words painted a grim picture, but everyone's attention remained on Buddy. They had to stabilize him before delving deeper into the strange and unsettling events Jake had witnessed. Finally, after ensuring Buddy was stable, Jake was ready to reveal what he had uncovered. His heart pounded as he reached into his bag, pulling out a folder he had taken from the facility. "We need to talk," Jake began, breaking the tense silence in the room. The vet and locals leaned in closer, sensing the gravity of the situation. He had their full attention now. It was time to disclose everything. "There's something you all need to know," he began, showing the documents he had taken. The papers detailed horrifying experiments on animals, creating genetically modified creatures. The room fell silent as eyes scanned the contents of the folder. Gasps and murmurs followed as the gravity of the situation sunk in. This is unbelievable," the vet muttered, visibly shaken. The true extent of the facility's actions started to unfold before them. Jake explained that the dog had been part of a secret experiment involving mutations. "Buddy wasn't just any dog," Jake said. "He was part of some sort of government project." Faces around the room grew pale. The documents described twisted scientific endeavors meant to enhance dogs with unusual capabilities. But there were also notes on the psychological torment and physical stress the animals endured. It painted a very dark picture. "They dumped the dog in the lake after the experiment," he said. Everyone stared in disbelief. "They probably thought he wouldn't survive the cold water," Jake continued. The room buzzed with shock and anger. "How could they do this?" someone exclaimed. The realization of human cruelty hit hard. Buddy was lucky to have survived, but his scars, both physical and emotional, were a testament to the horror he had been subjected to. The revelation left everyone in the clinic in shock and disbelief. They struggled to comprehend that such a monstrous experiment had taken place right under their noses. Shouts of indignation and fear filled the room. "We need to inform the authorities," the vet insisted. The depth of the conspiracy seemed unfathomable. Jake nodded, determined to see this through. Together, they had to ensure no other animals suffered the same fate as Buddy.
If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.